I would like to say that we saved the best for last, but Grover, I'm not sure after that whether I could. I'm just saying, you know. Nah, we did. I got to tell you, I moved back to Washington, D.C. in 2002, 2003, and worked for the American Conservative Union in part from a recommendation from Grover Norquist from Americans for Tax Reform, who I got to know back in the 1990s. And I got to tell you, I studied at the feet of the master. I mean, this guy is the guy when it comes to conservatives in Washington, D.C. And when I moved back to Nevada, I actually was living in Carson City in 2005, and we kept in touch. And I said, you know, Grover, we should do a CPAC out on the West Coast because a lot of folks out here can't fly 5-6 hours back to D.C. and the expense and everything. I said, we should do something here. And Grover said, yeah, I'm in. So he has been he has been my co-host for this event from day one. And I couldn't be more happy to have Grover Norquist here to close out today's festivities before we start drinking and book signing. And you're going to sign books, right? And I said, correct? Yep, he's going to sign some books before he has to fly back. Now, politically, everybody knows Grover is the father of the Taxpayer Protection Pledge. I mean, he is the guy, yeah. And he is more than that to me. I mean, he has been a mentor, but he's also been a friend. And we should follow him politically. He's right 99.8% of the time. I'd reserve just a little bit. We disagree on one thing, you know, rare occasion. But I got to tell you, what's your Twitter? Is it at Grover Norquist? Yeah. Okay. Because politically he's fantastic. But Grover is going through right now with 8- and 9-year-old daughters what many of us have already been through. And if you follow him on Twitter and read some of the things that he writes, it is just absolutely, it's fantastic. It's humorous quite often. He has a bit of a sense of humor. I think you've actually performed on stage. Which is that? Not the Comedy Club. The Improv, okay, there. And so I would highly recommend not following Grover just for the political stuff, but man, you're going to love, he's got 2 great kids. His wife, Sama, is fantastic. He's not just a political mentor. Over all these years, probably 20 years, he's a friend. And I don't have very many friends in politics because it's not a good idea. Grover Norquist is my friend, and I'm proud to introduce him to close out today's program. Grover, come on up.
Thank you, Chuck. Your coffee cup? I can see over it. Okay. Thanks, Chuck. I'm delighted to be here. The CLC's a wonderful idea and an important part of the modern conservative movement. We need to be a movement not just of the East Coast, but of the whole country. Chuck asked me to talk about the tax reform, tax reduction that's being debated in Washington, D.C. right now. You know, not just this year, but right now and for the next 2.5 months. It's going to determine whether the Republicans hold the House in 2018 or not. It'll determine whether we pick up 5 Senate seats or not. And it will determine whether we grow sufficiently rapidly over the next decade that we leave behind us a lot of the world's problems, because some of our competitors in the world are a problem if we're growing at 2% a year, and we won't be able to see them in the rearview mirror if we grow at 4% a year. So I think it's a very important time politically, economically, in terms of the structure of the parties. But I want to go back in time just a little bit to the founding of the country, because taxes were central then to the Tea Party movement, to our view that Britain was mistreating the United States. Back in 1774, the average tax paid by colonists in the 13 colonies was 2% of their income, 2%. At that time, if you lived in Britain and you were one of the annoying oppressors in London, you were paying 20% of your income in taxes for the privilege of being mean to us. We were at 2, they were at 20. They were thinking of going to 3, and we started shooting at them. So we had the right sense that this was going in the wrong direction, and we weren't going to stand for it. We were a little more sensitive. Taxes of, I mean, that's state, local, federal. I mean, they didn't have states, but you know, that's all taxes, 2%. In Philadelphia, they went crazy. It's about 4% in Philadelphia, but 2% average across the country. Matter of fact, almost all of the colonies were set up as tax shelters. They were given no tax for X number of years. The Swedish colonies, the Dutch colonies, the British colonies were all given lower taxes as part of the deal. Why don't you go over and risk your life, and we won't tax you at all for the next 10 years, and then never more than anybody in the home country ever again. When we had the revolution, the people we were fighting, the Tories, were known as friends of government. That was what people called them, the friends of government. We were the sons of liberty. They were the friends of government. Nothing has changed other than that the friends of government have gotten more expensive to the rest of us, and unfortunately more numerous. As we move forward, today, the two parties have distinct worldviews, and nowhere clearer than on the tax issue. That was not always the case. You will from time to time hear idiots on television say things like, why can't we go back to the good old days of bipartisan compromise? I'm not quite sure why this was such a good thing or why they're so excited about it, but they're very excited about it. And anyone who talks to you about the good old days or what we used to do of bipartisan compromise is in fact telling you how very old they are. Because 40, 50 years ago, everything was bipartisan because the two parties didn't tell you anything other than the fact of, Fred's a Republican. Oh, he was born north of the Mason-Dixon line. And Mary's a Democrat. Yeah, she was born south of the Mason-Dixon line. It didn't tell you whether you wanted higher taxes or lower taxes or lots of wars or few wars or what your views on anything was except where you were born. It was geographical. Wasn't based on principle. And we all know, little old ladies who live in Mississippi who agreed with Ronald Reagan on absolutely everything and voted for George McGovern because Sherman had been unpleasant to Atlanta recently. And it took quite some time. So this everything was bipartisan because when there was a fight, the liberal Republicans and the liberal Democrats would get together and fight the conservative Democrats and the conservative Republicans. And the shirts and skins told you absolutely nothing about what was going on in the fight. This compromise thing flows from the same nonsense. And that is, Ted Kennedy wanted much bigger government right away. And Richard Nixon wanted somewhat bigger government around now, pretty soon. And so they would compromise between much bigger government and somewhat bigger government, which was bigger government. And they would do this every year. You compromise between a lot and a little, and a lot and a little, and a lot and a little, and pretty soon you're up against the wall over there. Because the government is just getting bigger. It's like those lobster traps. You can go in, but you can't go out. It kept going that way. And so the left was very happy with that. Oh, they get frustrated, and Richard Nixon was a terrible right-winger because they only increased the government 10%, and they really wanted 20. But in point of fact, during the lifetime of Ronald Reagan, the two parties, the political lifetime of Ronald Reagan, the two parties did sort themselves out. And the Taxpayer Protection Pledge was part of that. It helped because I thought, and it is a true story that I thought this up when I was 12 or 13, and our teacher in public school had been telling us that democracy was silly because nobody knows the name of their state legislator, and how could you possibly vote for people if you don't even know who they are? And I thought, well, that made a certain amount of sense, but what if? What if one of the parties would never raise your taxes? Then that would tell you a lot, because they're not going to raise taxes. It also puts a limit on what they're going to spend. And so if you knew that the R would never raise your taxes, you could, there may be other issues you'd work on, but I thought that was good for 45%. And then you'd work on some other issues to get over 51. But nobody took my advice when I was 13. So I had to wait a while. And in 1985, I created the pledge, which was a simple written statement. I will, as an elected official, I will oppose and vote against. This covers things like voting in committee when it wasn't registered for it, and then voting against it in the legislature when your vote shows up. But I will oppose and vote against any and all efforts to raise taxes. Pretty simple. No net tax increase. You want to do tax reform? Fine. Just not a tax increase. And we got quite a number of people to make that commitment. First year, 100 Republicans in the House, 20 in the Senate. 2 years later, George Herbert Walker Bush. Oddly enough, Ronald Reagan was elected for the third term, but somehow he got in. But he did promise he wasn't going to raise taxes, George Herbert Walker Bush. And then 2 years later, he did raise taxes, and then he lost the election. And he had, apart from this tax increase thing, a fairly successful presidency. He kicked Iraq out of Kuwait and didn't get stuck occupying the place for 20 years. He managed the collapse of the Soviet Union without a lot of blood on the floor. All these things that you thought could never happen, he did. Very impressive. And everybody kept looking at, you raised taxes. You said you wouldn't, and you raised taxes. And he lost the next election to an odd character. And what it demonstrated to the rest of the Republican Party was people really care about taxes, and they really care about being lied to about something central like taxes, okay? And that's when we went to about 99% of all the Republicans in the House and Senate running, signing the pledge and keeping the pledge. Now, George Herbert Walker Bush broke the pledge, and no one's life is a complete waste. Some people serve as bad examples. And so you can say, don't do that, okay? And he's helped educate an entire generation of Republicans. Take the pledge, win the primary. Keep the pledge, get reelected, okay? Repeat, wash, rinse. And we have now turned the modern Republican Party into the party at the national level. I'm very aware, I am in Nevada here, talking to people who have seen tragic examples of the failure to learn on this part of your governor, and sadly some of your state legislators as well. But in the rest of the country, in most states, the Republicans we do not raise taxes. And at the national level, we haven't had a tax increase since 1990, when Bush convinced some Republicans to support him. And every single one of those people who supported him are either dead or retired. So there are none of them in office today who broke their word, and because they're off doing something else. But we have, as a result of the pledge, as long as the Republicans have had the House or the Senate or the presidency or some combination of those, there's not been a tax increase. We got 2 tax increases in recent history. One was, or a set of them were during the first 2 years of Clinton, where the Democrats had both houses and the presidency, and the first 2 years of Obama. And after each one of those, the Republicans took the House and the Senate, and the second time they took the House and almost the Senate. So you'd think the Democrats would learn, but they haven't. They keep wanting to come back and raise taxes again. Hillary ran on a tax increase platform, lost, but that was her platform, significant tax hikes. So we've now moved to where, and again, during that 16-year period, in between those 2 periods, no tax increase, and none since the 2010 when the Republicans took the House. So you can go into the voting booth dead drunk and vote for the Republican and know that he or she may invade small countries they can't pronounce, but they will not raise your taxes, okay? They won't raise your taxes. There may be other problems, but they won't raise your taxes. Unless they live in Nevada, yes, sorry. Prior to emigrating to the United States, I grew up in Massachusetts, so I tend not to make fun of anyone else's state legislature. But we now have two parties, one committed to reducing taxes, one to getting taxes as much as they can, and that's where we are right now. The Republicans have put together a series of proposals. As we get towards the end, the people who haven't done their homework are going to show up late and go, oh, I have an idea. You know, would have been nice if you'd brought it in a year ago when everybody else turned in their homework, but there will be some last minute ideas. And if you're a senator and you have two friends, we have to listen to your idea. We do. That's why it's important. It's a couple of times I've met with Trump since he was president. Every time he obsesses on winning 5 more Senate seats. Got to have 5 more Senate seats. He doesn't explain it, but if he had 5 more Senate seats, there are 3 people whose phone calls he'd never take again. Because you wouldn't have to. Now, the 3 might vary from vote to vote, right? But you can always have 3, heck, 4, go crazy. 4 guys could wander off and do something odd. But right now, we can't have more than 2 decide that they're misbehaving to get something across the finish line. I believe that we will get a significant tax cut that'll happen before Thanksgiving, that is going to be very, very pro-growth. And let me walk through why I'm optimistic. That's because I'm talking to all the guys involved. There's the big 6, Mnuchin and Cohn, Treasury Secretary and economic advisors. If I had as much money as them, I would buy a vowel myself. Mnuchin I have trouble with. And Cohn, there's no E in there. It's just Cohn, like that. But anyway, so the guys with fewer vowels, they get in touch with some of the people who have too many vowels in there. But anyway, work something out. The 2 guys in the House, Paul Ryan and Brady, don't blame Ryan for 30 people who can't show up in time and do their homework. Or our friend Mitch McConnell. If you want to discipline the 3 people who wander off, okay, and show McConnell what he's supposed to do, there's no threat, right? We don't have earmarks anymore, good, which is good. Earmarks are the corruption where you would buy people's votes and where to get them to vote against their principles. And so it's not necessarily a good idea. I'm in favor of Democrats being able to get earmarks so we could buy their votes on certain things, because they don't have souls, so it's not quite the same problem. But I don't want Republicans being bought that way. But Hatch on the Senate side, and Mitch McConnell, here's where they're on agreement. And Ryan told me a month and a half ago, he said, back when he had put together, in his view, this perfect tax plan that all fit together. It's like this jigsaw puzzle, this 3-dimensional, and if you held it like this, it all held together. But one of the pieces was the border adjustability feature of the corporate income tax, which, if you could have passed the whole thing right then, I'd said, take it. It's really good. Sure, there are lots of challenges. It's very good altogether. But 3 senators from Walmart said, we can't do that, so you take that piece out. And now you have to disassemble it, put it back on the table, and then put it back together again and make it fit, which is not easy to do. It's not even Rubik's Cube. It's worse than that in terms of what you're doing. But his point was that when they were still pushing for the border adjustability as something that held it together and made all the pieces work, we're going by some Senate rules that you or I would not have designed, but that's what we're living with. So the tax increase can only go for 10 years. And then it lapses, except for anything that can be made permanent, because there's a pay for. And so you're trying to fit things into this 10-year period and then the outer 11 years. Bush did this by chopping everybody's head off in year 11. We go, we have a tax cut, whoop, no we don't. And it all disappeared at year 11. We're trying to make some of the key features permanent, because some of these things, if you just do them for a few years, like getting rid of the death tax, you don't get any advantage, because unless you have a better idea of when you're passing away than most people do, you have to plan and around the death tax, which brings all the things you're trying to avoid by getting rid of the death tax. So some things you want to make permanent. Some things you could live with them being temporary. You just like to re-up them at the end of 10 years and make them permanent. But they were at 80% agreement, and they're now at 97% agreement on what goes in. Here's where the disagreements are, and that is how much of each ingredient do you put in. Trump wants to take the business rate to 15%, both for corporations and for what are called pass-throughs, subchapter S, sole proprietorships, partnerships, the businesses where people run a small business, some of them not so small, but they pay through their personal income tax. That rate is 40, sometimes even 44%, depending how you're structured, and the corporate rate's 35. Trump says, let's take them both to 15. He really, really wants to go to 15. I think 15 is a wonderful number. As soon as we get there, I'll be appalled it's not 10, but for right now, 15 is good. And so 15 is good. Ryan was working over here with the House guys, and they thought they had certain constraints. They came down to 20. This is before Trump won the election or anything. 15? Okay, 20. So they started moving it down. And so they started, and then Trump accepted all of the stuff on the personal side that the House Republicans had put together because he had some ideas, but he didn't have anything that had been scored. So he took the House Republicans and said, fine, it's all in there, boom, done. And so they started to come together a year ago. And they've been coming together. So, I mean, everyone likes their idea best. I like one of the ideas that the House Republicans like, which is to go to full immediate business expensing rather than long depreciation schedules. Tremendously simplification, drops the cost of capital. When we've done it from time to time or moved towards it, we have strong economic growth, and you can tell what parts of the economy are driven by that investment, lower taxes on investment. But it's expensive, and so there's an argument how much you get rates down, how much you do expensing. You know, for me, that's like, would you like strawberry ice cream or vanilla ice cream, and how much of each? Well, I'd like lots of both. Well, they don't all fit in the container. Okay, fill the container. I don't care which ones go in. They're both fine. They're both great. They're both pro-growth. I like them. What else do you want to put in? Consensus item, get rid of the death tax. Everybody agrees on that, all the Republicans. Consensus item, get rid of the alternative minimum tax, the very complicated alternative structure. Trump must pay it because he really hates it, and it's visceral. And then on the personal side, we're going to take the standard deduction from $6,000 for an individual up to 12, from 12,000 for a married couple up to 24, and 7 rates down to 3. There'll be some back and forth. Then we're going to allow all that lovely money that's overseas. We used to say $2.5 trillion. I checked with some of the Fortune 500 guys. It's now $3.5 trillion because American companies earn money overseas, and to bring it back because of our stupid tax policy, they get penalized. French companies work in the United States. They make a bunch of money. They pay American taxes. They go back to France, and the French people say, thank you for bringing all those lovely dollars with you. They don't say, we have to steal some of that before we let it into the country. We do. We're one of like 3 countries, and I can't pronounce the other ones. Anyway, I forget who they are, but then there are 3 of them. We haven't had a war with them, so I don't know who they are. But that have the same worldwide system, but we punish people for bringing money back. So the $3.5 trillion over there. Now, some of it's in buildings, but at least $2.5 trillion in cash. And virtually all of that would come back over the course of the next year. So when you look at what's going to happen, we pass this bill. In the next 6-7 months, $2.5 trillion of money that right now is being touched all the time and fondled by these foreigners over there. They touch all their money. Like Scrooge McDuck, they're diving in our dollars, and we go, get over here. We bring it all back here and empty out their swimming pools and invest it in the United States. It'd be tremendous, tremendous driver of growth for the United States. Very, very helpful. And that's one of the pieces. You take the rate from 35 down to 15. And, you know, because not everything fits, it may be 20. That's not treason. I am in favor of compromise properly understood. Compromise means moving towards liberty as quickly as I'm able to, because there are other people in the way, even if it's not as quickly as I'd like to if there weren't any other people in the way. Okay? So if I'm trying to get from D.C. to California and I get to Missouri, which is very close to Missouri, it's not treason, okay? Missouri's on the way to California. It is a compromise. Today we got to Missouri, soon we will get to California. We are heading in the right direction, slower than we'd hoped, but there was traffic. Okay, so, however, if we're trying to go from Washington, D.C. to California, and our feet are all wet, and everyone around us is speaking French, we are moving in the wrong direction. That is not compromise. That's called losing. So when these guys would come to us and say, well, why don't we compromise and raise taxes? No. Raising taxes is losing. Cutting taxes is winning. When one party wants to cut taxes and one party wants to raise taxes, there is no compromise, okay? Somebody wins, somebody loses, okay? And as Ronald Reagan said about the Soviets, who are more flexible now than the progressives, you know, my position is we win, they lose, okay? I vote for that on taxes. We win, they lose, okay? We're going to cut taxes. We're not going to raise taxes. We're not going to raise taxes in return for anything else. You know, but no, we'll cut some spending and we'll raise some taxes. You'll like it. I don't like the tax thing. No, really. Here's what we're going to do. You like pepperoni on your pizza, and we like shards of glass. So have the pepperoni with the pizza, the pepperoni and the shards of glass. I don't want shards of glass. No, you like pepperoni. So no shards of glass, no tax increases at all. It's not part of a compromise. That's only losing. So this is coming together, and there'll be lots of back and forth, and because everybody wants their idea first forward. All of the ideas up front, they're out. I like them all. They're all good. There are some ways we can make the tax cut bigger. The one I particularly like, they're not going to do, but that is, you know that 10-year window we have? 10 is, you can cut taxes as much as you want with 50 votes plus the vice president in the Senate. That's all driven by the fact that we have to do it within these certain rules because we don't have 60 votes. If we had 60 votes, we could make everything permanent. We wouldn't have any funny rules. We wouldn't have to be asking CBO and joint tax how to score anything. But they gave us this loophole on how to cut taxes with only 51 votes, and that's what we got to take. So that's why we're limited in, you know, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Because it can't fit in. And down the road, we may be able to get rid of the filibuster. We moved a long way towards that because the Democrats, as we went through the last election, started a campaign to kill the filibuster because they were planning to elect Hillary and a majority of the Senate. And I thought they were going to get it when the election night started. Pleased it didn't, but I thought that was not a bad way to bet. So they were driving this campaign. We got to get rid of the filibuster because they wanted to be able to govern from the Senate against the Republican House. And you couldn't get anything done, they learned under Obama, if you could be filibustered. We stopped just about anything that they wanted to do because they really want to do a lot of crazy stuff, and they're very disappointed that they had 2 years of the Obama presidency, but not 8. And they wanted to do that back to us. So we can take that 10-year window and make it a 25-year window, okay? And the reason is the Budget Control Act of 1974 simply says you have to have a window more than 5 years. And within that window, you can do anything you want. But after the window, it has to be deficit neutral. So you can't blow up the deficit in the out years. But I checked, and there are quite a number of integers larger than 5. 10 is not the only one. 25 is one of several integers larger than 5. And if you did 25, you could have a temporary tax cut, goes out 25 years, and then I don't care, for crying out loud. The world will be different by then. Then we'll kick out another 25 years if we have to. But the guys in the House and Senate don't want to vote for a 25-year budget because what that means is you then have to explain to the American people what happens to the deficit, not because of anything we're doing, but because of the entitlement programs as they go out. The 10-year deficit's scary. The 25-year deficit debt stuff is really scary, which means we should fix it. So I think we should tell people how bad it is. But these guys run for office, I don't, and they're going, you have no idea how scared, our guys can't do that. I understand. So we're going to 10 years, we're going to have lots of tax cuts in 10 years, and I think what you'll do is you'll see a lot of things put in temporarily, knowing full well that once people get used to them, they'll be made permanent. Remember the R&D, research and development tax credit? Every 2 years they'd extend it. We finally made it permanent, okay? If you do full expensing for 3 years, which gets you past 2 election cycles, I think people will go, that was very powerful, let's do it permanently. And the president's all in on this. You see him out flying to states with Democratic senators. There will not be a single Democrat vote for this tax cut that we need. By that I mean, we'd love to have 8, and then you could go to 60, and then you could do lots of things. There aren't 8 Democrats willing to support a significant tax cut. They might pretend there were 6 throughout the entire negotiating period, and then hope we'd get 2, but you wouldn't. So that's a fool's errand to have that conversation. I understand that people in Washington go, oh, we'd love to have bipartisan support, because you're supposed to say that because it makes you sound nice or something. Okay. But as long as you don't spend any time actually working on that, because it's not going to happen, could you get, let's say McCain and Maine and Alaska take another walk, maybe we could get one of the 4, 5, 6, 7 Democrats who are scared to vote for us. Not a chance. There will be no Democrat vote to be the 50th or 51st vote. Now, once we have 51 votes, or 50 plus the vice president if we need it, you might get 2 or 3 Democrats who are scared of losing the next election. Yeah, me too. But only after they went to Schumer and asked his permission. And he would go, yeah, the Republicans have the votes, it's going to pass, everybody knows that. I'll go explain to the progressives in your state to back off, because we're lying to the people of Montana and North Dakota, and we're trying to fool them and slip you through. So they won't yell at you. And this, so there are no D votes that matter. There may be some that show up afterwards, after we've won. What is that, chicken, not Chicken Little, the little red hen, okay? Everybody showed up to eat the bread afterwards. Nobody did any work. There are no Ds that'll do any work to get it across the finish line. They may want to get credit for it in some of the red states. But there really are 5, 6. Watch Florida. I'm talking about the Senate races now. Because we were supposed to go into this election with, we abolished Obamacare and we cut your taxes and they turn the economy around, give us the House again, give us all those lovely Senate states that are red states, and you've got these left-wing Democrats in them, please fix that, and we'll pick up 6, 7 Senate seats. But then we didn't get the health care thing through. Now, we may actually get a very interesting slice of the health care thing, and you don't need it all. If you poke a hole in a balloon, you don't have to have chopped it in half, you just have to poke a hole in it. And with Obamacare, you say 2 things. No more mandates, so nobody has to buy this. And we're going to block grant it to the states and let them do anything they want, okay? So all 57 states can take a different approach to this. You have, in fact, ended Obamacare. Now it's just a question of block granting and bringing down the total number as we add Medicaid into all of it, and then move it forward with a cap so that it grows with inflation, but not more. Okay? You do that for 50 years, and the entitlements are not a problem anymore. You just have to have it grow slower than the rest of the economy. We don't have to cut anything. Just put it on inflation, but not more. And very quickly, it recedes as a driver of destroying state budgets, which it is right now, Medicaid and Obamacare, if we don't get it. So that one little thing, the Graham, Cassidy, Heller thing, is actually worth having. And they went in and they took the crown jewel out. And I wanted to get all the jewels out. You know, we have some time, fill the bag up, take it all away. But, well, we may get this. That would be very nice. But if we don't, the first one was, we got rid of Obamacare, we cut your taxes, boom, vote for us. So now we have to go, we cut your taxes, boom, vote for us. So we have like one sales pitch instead of two, which means it's got to be bigger, louder, cooler, more exciting, and have more kick than we had planned. Trump knows this. The House Republicans know this. The Senate Republicans know this. Even the grumpy guys who are in the caucus, I only vote for perfect things. Would you like to be in the majority or the minority next year? Well, I kind of like to be in the majority. Then, eat your broccoli. We'll come back and make it. We'll come back and make it permanent next year, or perfect next year. And the perfect is not the enemy of the good, unless you spend too much time drooling over the perfect and you drop the good and it breaks, and then you're left with stupid and evil. And you can see perfect, but you weren't paying attention to good. So the politics of this is aligned. The economics of this is aligned. We've been through this drill. Unlike healthcare, which has serious competing opposition, the hospitals hated it. The pharmaceutical companies were scared. Everybody was scared of undoing Obamacare because you never quite understood which pieces were going to do what to you as you moved out. And now everybody does like the tax reduction and the tax reform. This will pass. We'll go into the next election. And the parts of the tax cut will take effect September 28th when they introduce the bill. Some will take effect January 1st. Some may take effect January 1st last year, so that everybody could get a higher standard deduction in their 17 taxes. So in April, when you get your refund, it's bigger than you expected. And while the Democrats are explaining this was all for rich people, there are all these non-rich people going, excuse me, I think this is a great idea. We should play this game next year, too. And so there will be some straight-out politicking to win the next election. And I would argue that you can go from 2% growth, which is what Obama gave us. That's what the French live with. We can go from that to 4% growth. Ronald Reagan, when he cut taxes, we had 4% growth for 7 years in a row. The first year his tax cut took effect, 1983, 4 million jobs were created. 1 million were created in October of that year. 1 million jobs were created in October of that year. And so you can turn on a dime and have dramatic economic growth and job creation. The tax package they're debating in each of the iterations it has will all move us in that direction, and I think get us there. But we've also been doing one thing, the House, the Senate, the President, and the President's appointees. He tends to tweet and get all the attention, but he has a cabinet and an FCC commissioner, an FDA commissioner, and a head of the EPA, and all these are agency guys, and they are all busy deconstructing destructive stuff from previous generations, years, not just stuff in the last 5 years, but going back, the accumulation of barnacles that are slowing economic growth down. The length of time it takes to get a permit can be dramatically reduced, and that if it takes 12 years to build a bridge versus 6, the same stinking bridge is a lot less expensive if you're not working on it for 12 years. And the numbers you look at are just terribly shocking. I mean, you can drop the cost of building stuff in half if you did it quicker. Same number of workers, same technology, you're not inventing anything weird. You just do it up front instead of sit around and wait and sit around and wait and sit around and wait. And that is moving forward. I believe that 20 years from now, when we look back and say, why did we get growth under Trump and the Republicans and not under Obama? Half of the story will be deregulation, and half of the story will be taxes. But between now and November 18, the story is only going to be taxes, because the press cannot cover the 14 Congressional Review Act laws, which we passed with 50 or 51 votes, sometimes 52, on all 14. These were very tough votes because every one of them was wrapped around and dressed up in environmental garb and so on, even though it's just stupid regulation. They gave it nice-sounding names. And we undid 14 of those. House, Senate, signature, done, gone. Those regulations can never come back unless Congress revotes them. You can't do them. Once you've taken them out with CRA, you can't have another president stick a reg in. It's got to go to Congress for that. This is about as permanent a deregulation as you can get from Congress. The FCC, which had been taking all of our broadband and everything and turning it into a utility, a public utility. They actually used the public utility law to announce that AT&T and Comcast and all the companies that compete with each other on broadband are really one utility, and they should be regulated like they were, a gas company. And then they wondered why in the last several years investment in broadband had fallen, because they were looking, if Hillary had gotten reelected, of being told, well, you can have a 5% rate of return. We'll go buy CDs, you don't need to take risks if the government's going to control prices, which is what they were doing. Well, the new FCC commissioner is moving 180 degrees in the other direction. The FDA was closing stuff down, and they're now opening it up. We got a unanimous vote in the Senate. I don't know if people followed this, but the Right to Try effort. There was an effort started by the Goldwater Institute, free market think tank in Arizona, and it's 37 states passed a law. It says, in this state, if the FDA has said a drug is safe, but they haven't gotten around for another 5 years to say it's effective, which means it's not legal to use nationally, we say if it's for a terminal disease that you can buy it, use it, make it, whatever you want in this state. Sort of like medical marijuana, but on steroids for every fatal disease. And the FDA says it's illegal, we say it's not. Well, every time somebody had a child with the problem and they go to these pharmaceutical companies, they go, we would love to give it to you. State law says it's legal. Talk to those nice people at the FDA. As soon as they say yes, we'll give you 12 of them, okay? We're not the problem, the FDA is. The FDA, for the first time in its history, was back on its heels, having to deregulate, and we got a vote in the US Senate, unanimous consent, meaning any one jerk could have stopped it, saying that everybody in all states will have the right to have access. Nobody gives it to you for free, but you can buy it, you can make it, you can buy it, and nobody gets to sue anybody if it didn't work out because you were dying. And we're trying this. We don't know if it's effective. We know it's safe. And this is rethinking the whole FDA dereg. We're going to change all of labor law from that way to this way. We have to wait till October to be able to change out the chief lawyer for the NLRB, because that's a fixed term. But when he goes, all sorts of stuff liberalizes on labor law, and the economy's already reacting well to knowing that the cavalry's coming. You can invest, they had banned to make illegal. They're in the process of making illegal all franchises. Yes, these things that get no attention. CNN can't be bothered to tell you that 15 million people have a job that isn't going to look anything like whatever, because their goal is they want everybody, they don't want franchise owners, they want everybody to be an employee. Why? Because then you can unionize all of McDonald's from one store, and you can sue all of McDonald's from one store. So the trial lawyers, it's no fun suing one guy who owns 3 Burger Kings, because you can only get so much cash from him. It's fun to unionize 3 Burger Kings. Oh, we got 12 guys. Yay! We can steal their dues and have a party. But the whole country, that's worth stealing. And so they were looking to do that. And basically, Hillary announced she was going to crack down, her words, crack down on independent contractor law, because they don't like independent contractors anymore. They like franchise stuff. So they were trying to make everybody an employee, so you're easy to tax and easy to unionize. And then they were going to appoint one person to the Supreme Court, not Gorsuch, that's not who they had in mind, it's a different guy. And then they'd have a 5-4 vote to end right to work. There were cases coming up, and the professors were out writing papers about why right to work is unconstitutional. Nobody noticed it until just now, but it is. And then the court was going to rule that way. We now have the 5th vote on the court to do the opposite. You may have heard of the Friedrichs case, which is 6 teachers in California who said, we don't want to pay union dues, we shouldn't have to belong to the union or pay dues as a condition of employment. And they went up to the Supreme Court, and it was going to be 5-4. Scalia was writing the decision when he died, okay, which has led to all sorts of interesting conspiracy theories. But it was going to happen. It was happening, okay? It wasn't something they will someday hear. They had heard it. They had decided. He was writing the piece. We're now having another case called Janus out of, I believe, Northern Illinois that's being brought down. And I don't know whether it was their idea or our idea, but somebody was pushing Janus down to get the decision on right to work for public sector employees. I think it was our team. The other people had other cases, and that's been accepted. This year, the Supreme Court is almost certain to rule that if you're a teacher or a policeman or a fireman or a government worker in any of the states, you can't be forced to join a union. When we passed that law, a version of that law in Wisconsin back in 2011, a third of all the government employees quit paying dues, quit joining the union. 137,000 people, government employees, left paying unions. Average dues for a teacher in Wisconsin who makes $50,000 a year, 2%, $1,000. So it's $137 million missing from the left's coffers every year, not every 4 years, every year. So when people suggest that Hillary Clinton ran an incompetent presidential race because they didn't think to spend more time in Milwaukee because some polls might have suggested that they needed to focus there, or anecdotally people had heard that there were these union guys who were willing to vote for Trump, they should have known that there was a hole in their boat that was in charge of funding turnout, that was in charge of knock and drag, that would go door to door and put people in cars and make them go vote and bring them home. And they were missing hundreds, not tens, hundreds of millions of dollars over the previous 4 years, and all of those structures didn't happen. We now have passed the identical law in Iowa that turned Wisconsin. I believe we will have that law passed soon in Kentucky and Missouri. We are within spitting distance in New Hampshire, if you can spit a long way. And we've done a partial version of that in Michigan. I think we'll get more of it in Michigan. They got $30 million the teachers are missing in Michigan now because 30,000 people have quit the union. But they also require local governments to buy their insurance through a insurance company that just happens to be owned by the teachers union. And they jack up the prices to where at the end of each year there's a $30 million check that's written into the teachers union. And all of the guys who do forensics believe that that $30 million that keeps showing up each year is from this insurance company. It's what they did in Wisconsin, and the cities save a lot of money because the city pays for this. The teachers don't pay for it. The city taxpayers pay for it. And there are cities that saved hundreds of thousands of dollars, that city, by competitively bidding out that insurance and not going through the Wisconsin Education Association setup. So as we go into 2018, we'll not only have the wind at our backs, hopefully with a crippling of Obamacare, that we are so close to being able to do that. And I won't say anything mean about Mini-Me for a week and a half if he can actually get this done. Graham. But also the tax oomph, the regulatory oomph, which is not seen but very powerful because everybody's making decisions on the fact that they know that the regulatory regimes are shifting in the right direction. The big jump in the stock market was not Trump's going to do great things. It's that they knew Hillary was going to win, and all of those regulations, Hillary just had to sit there and twiddle her fingers. She didn't have to do anything, and they all went in, and they ended any sort of independent contractor law, and they ended the whole, and they were changed labor law dramatically, much more so than they had already. And a lot of things that they'd done were scheduled. A year from now, vaping would be illegal in the United States if Hillary had won because they'd actually passed that regulation through the FDA. The Trump FDA head God says, no, we're going to rethink this 4 years out to rethink it, meaning for the next 4 years you can't touch it, okay? By which time there won't be 10 million vapors who've already elected their first senator, Ron Johnson, in the last election cycle, which he said on election day. But there'll be 20 million vapors. Now try and have prohibition. So once Trump won, the next day, every stock market analyst goes, so they're not going to end franchising. You know, Trump didn't have to jump through hoops. He didn't have to do amazing things. He just had to not do all the crazy things that were on track for Hillary to do if she did. I mean, she was going to add her own stupid and destructive things, but mostly she just had to sit there like this and allow the ones that were in the works under Obama, because he didn't do them year one, because 4 years later he could have lost an election over some of this stuff. So he did it towards the end and then kicked him out. And so they hadn't all kicked in, other than they were about to, you know, they said, this is the law 2 years from now. And somehow that's supposed to make it more palatable. So we are in a very good position. Watch the debate on tax reform. I believe that I'll be done shooting match over by the end of November. And if we're going to get the piece of, the rather vital piece of Obamacare taken out, which collapses the whole thing, that will happen by the 30th of September. It has to pass the Senate by September 30th, or that special reconciliation tool that we have for that one lapses and goes away. Can't do it in October. It has to be by September 30th, which is why the other team is dragging their feet on giving us a CBO score. So watch and see how dishonest they're going to be, the staff there. And it's whether they try and give you a lousy score to upend you, which I think would be tough to do, or more likely, just be very late in getting it done. And then you have to watch to see whether that Democrat from New Jersey gets convicted before this happens, in which case we do or don't need an extra vote in the House, in the Senate, or just is stuck in the trial. I don't know if they let you come down and vote, you know, when you're on trial for corruption. So with that said, two parties heading in different directions. We have a chance, and this is not the only tax cut of the Bush era, Trump era. We'll get a tax cut this year, we'll do that tax cut next year. If we hold the House and the Senate as we ought to, there'll be a tax cut each year. If your favorite tax cut is not in this package, get in line, we'll put it into the next ones. This is going to work, this is doing well, we have a lot to do, and all elected officials and candidates in Nevada should look at that and go, hey, we could do that too. Thank you.